The Battle of Iwo Jima was fought for more than a month in a rocky 8-square-mile area lined with underground tunnels that sheltered and supplied the Japanese. Here's a look at some of the most chilling, sad, horrific details of the Iwo Jima conflict. The island of Iwo Jima wasn't some densely populated territory that was particularly culturally or socially important to Japan. Geographically, it's obscure and remote, sitting in the northwestern end of the Pacific Ocean. There were no towns, cities, or even outposts. Iwo Jima was too small, about 8 square miles, and the terrain too punishing. It's a rock on which very little can grow, certainly not enough to sustain life.
There's no civilian population there. Every single person on that island is a Japanese soldier intending to sell it dearly with his life.
But Iwo Jima sits smack in the middle between Tokyo and the US territory of Guam, making it an ideal location for Allied forces during World War II who planned to use it as an observation post and staging area for air missions against Japan.
America sees it as an emergency landing strip. They will both now use it as a slaughterhouse.
But first, the Allies needed to drive out the Japanese in a bloody, barbaric battle made worse by the island's small size and rough topography. Despite its relatively small size, the Battle of Iwo Jima involved a staggeringly high number of combatants. Between the U.S. Marines V Amphibious Corps and several U.S. Navy battalions, about 70,000 Americans fought in Iwo Jima in 1945. Defending the island were 22,060 Japanese troops. Fighting lasted for 36 days, and both sides endured horrific losses. The American contingent lost 6,821 men, with about 20,000 more seriously injured. It was the highest number of losses in Marine Corps history.
Over 3,000 Marines never leave that island. Included in that number are 2 of the cameramen who took that footage.
The Japanese military presence was almost completely annihilated. Of the 22,060 troops, the vast majority of whom had been drafted, 18,844 died on Iwo Jima, a casualty rate of 85%, and a further 216 Japanese troops were detained as prisoners of war.
For the Emperor! Banzai! Banzai!
Of the 82 Marines who received the Medal of Honor for their service in the entirety of World War II, 22 fought in Iwo Jima. Of that figure, 14 received their awards posthumously. In early World War II battles on islands across the South Pacific, the Japanese met American troops head-on and hand-to-hand. However, Iwo Jima was unique in terms of its physical features, and Japanese General Tadamichi Kurobayashi exploited these, taking his troops deep into the island's interior to wait. Before U.S. units landed on the island, they pummeled it with airstrikes and coastal bombardments from nearby battleships. They planned to hit the island for 10 days before moving in, but thanks to Kurobayashi's strategies, the Japanese weren't taking many losses. As American troops arrived on Iwo Jima's beach on February 19, 1945, they struggled to literally gain a foothold. Iwo Jima is volcanic, covered in soft, hard-to-traverse ashy material covering steep slopes, and the Japanese used this to their advantage.
Bullets are whistling past us. We are in the open. Japanese mortars and also small arms fire are occasionally dropping around us.
To ensure the heaviest losses, they waited until the beaches were filled with Americans before opening fire from gunner stations concealed in the surrounding terrain. Despite being trapped between the enemy and the sea, some Americans evaded the charge and managed to seize part of an island airfield, which was one of the primary goals of the invasion. Iwo Jima took up a mere 8 square miles, but that's just the surface. Below ground, there was ample opportunity for the Japanese military to hide, plan, strategize, and conduct attacks in ways that confused American forces. Kurobayashi realized the Allies would eventually try to seize the island, so he formulated an ambitious plan to line the island with a network of secret tunnels.
It's a classic sort of guerrilla strategy being pursued by the Japanese on this island.
Vast, complex, and difficult to navigate, the Japanese built 1,500 distinct underground areas to be used as bunkers, armories, and safe rooms, connected by more than 11 miles of protected tunnels within which troops could freely move without detection. Not only could the Japanese stockpile weapons in these caves, but they had safe places to retreat to when cornered above ground. They could also use the maze of tunnels to move to ambush their baffled adversaries.
Almost like fighting ghosts. First you see them, then you wouldn't.
Once the Americans figured out the plan, however, the Japanese were trapped underground. Being cornered by well-armed Americans is how many Japanese troops lost their lives on Iwo Jima. Japanese troops armed with machine guns felled scores of American soldiers in the first few days of the invasion of Iwo Jima. Marine Herschel Woody Williams recalled the history. As we attacked, they would just mow us down, and we would have to back off. Tanks weren't doing much good either. So an officer asked Williams to be his regiment's flamethrower operator, and that's when things changed.
It's one of the most brutal, horrifying weapons. Nobody wants to be burned alive. He had to sort of adjust himself morally to what he was going to be asked to do.
With 4 other Marines offering cover fire, of whom 2 died almost immediately, Williams and his flamethrower torched multiple Japanese fortresses in rapid succession. He then fired into a dugout fort through an air vent, leaving no survivors. Williams made several runs back to the American side to refuel the gas-powered fire machine, but over the course of 4 hours, he destroyed all of his targets. Williams' efforts allowed the Americans to make progress on Iwo Jima, and within a few weeks, the battle was over. At war's end, President Harry Truman awarded Williams the Medal of Honor. The Americans who fought at Iwo Jima were almost entirely Marines and almost exclusively white men. However, a handful of U.S. Army units participated in the Battle of Iwo Jima, including the 476 Amphibious Truck Company, which was composed of 177 black soldiers. A vital support unit, the servicemen of the 476 drove 32-foot-long vehicles around the island's beaches, dodging Japanese gunfire to deliver ammunition, bombs, and reinforcement to Marines engaged in combat. Since the U.S. military was segregated throughout World War II, no black soldiers would have been part of the fighting brigades, and practice didn't end until 1948 via an executive order from President Truman. Another group of non-white Americans was crucial in the drive to win Iwo Jima. In 1942, the military brought in members of Navajo-affiliated indigenous tribes to assist in the war effort. The Navajo language is complex and differed from widely used European and Asian languages, so 29 Navajo speakers and writers created a memorized coded message system to relay information to the front lines. Marines who identified as Navajo participated in the Battle of Iwo Jima as code talkers. 6 specialists sent and received about 800 messages during the battle, none of which were ever decoded by the Japanese military. On February 23, 1945, Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the iconic image of 5 American service members raising the U.S. flag atop Iwo Jima's Mount Suribachi. One of the most famous news photos ever taken, it won Rosenthal a Pulitzer Prize, but the story is a bit more complicated. When Rosenthal got word that Marines were scaling Mount Suribachi, he followed them. When he reached the top, Sergeant Louis Lowery, photographer for the military publication Leatherneck, was there taking pictures of the Marines as they raised the U.S. flag. As American troops down below spotted it, celebratory gunfire broke out, triggering retaliatory shooting from Japanese soldiers. As Lowery ran to safety, he fell 50 feet, shattering his camera. On the way down the mountain, he ran into Rosenthal, now going back up with another photographer and a cinematographer. This time, he encountered another group of Marines bearing another flag. They'd been ordered to replace the initial one with this much larger, more visible one. As the Marines raised the replacement flag, Rosenthal took their picture, and that's the one that made history.
I lost my fear. If those guys made it, I could. But it was false, that feeling.
The planting of the flag didn't signal the end of the Battle of Iwo Jima. The flag staking took place just 5 days after combat began. The island wouldn't fall to the U.S. until March 26th, about a month later. The 36-day Battle of Iwo Jima ended on March 26, 1945, with the island securely in the hands of the U.S. military. When the fighting ended, U.S. servicemen scoured the island and uncovered about 3,000 Japanese troops in caves and tunnels. Most wouldn't surrender, and many were killed or forcibly captured as prisoners of war. But 2 soldiers eluded capture throughout the remainder of the war and for many years after. On the morning of January 9, 1949, nearly 4 years after the Battle of Iwo Jima and the end of World War II, a U.S. Air Force Jeep driver picked up 2 Asian male hitchhikers dressed in fatigues walking on the road near a Coast Guard facility. At first, officers thought the pair might be crewmen from a Chinese naval vessel working nearby. After escaping from custody, the men were found again, and the island's commander put them through a lengthy interview. The 2 men served as machine gunners in the Imperial Japanese Navy. The holdouts had survived underground for years without being detected, living off the land and getting by thanks to canned food and necessities stolen from the U.S. military outposts. They had even moved caves on occasion, lying low near well-traveled areas. American-led forces fighting in the Pacific Theater needed Iwo Jima for its strategic value. Although World War II came to an end in September 1945 with Japan's surrender, Iwo Jima remained under U.S. control for decades.
On August 30th, 1945, the first 15,000 American occupation forces landed on the Japanese mainland.
As Japan rebuilt and recovered, American military and other officials maintained a presence in the country until 1952. Diplomatic relations developed between the 2 countries, who signed a security treaty in 1951, and Japan emerged as a major global player. But all the while, the US continued to hold on to the small rocky island of Iwo Jima, 600 miles from mainland Japan. US military bases were operational there until 1968. The American contingent systematically returned Japanese areas it conquered during the war, beginning in 1953 with the Ryukyu Islands and ending in June 1968 with the handoff of the inhabited Chichijima and the officially uninhabited Iwo Jima. The Japanese reclaimed the island via a flag-changing ceremony held on Iwo Jima and an official government ceremony in Tokyo, which was attended by the Crown Prince and Prime Minister. The island now hosts a Japanese air base, as well as a U.S. military training center and a U.S. military cemetery. As the first groups of troops arrived on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, among their ranks were medics tasked with treating the ever-growing number of American military members. One of the first medical support staffers to hit the beach was hospital apprentice First Class James Firkin Twett. The 19-year-old was technically not a combatant, but that didn't mean he wasn't subject to gunfire. After he heard a fallen soldier call out for medical assistance, a Japanese-fired shell exploded at his feet. One leg was instantly and violently separated from the rest of his body, while the other was thoroughly obliterated. While largely unable to walk and losing a great deal of blood, Twett still found the troop calling for his help and assisted others in need of medical care before he was taken off the battlefield. He died 2 days later. Another medic, pharmacist mate 3rd Class Byron A. Derry, had been awarded a Silver Star for his service in the Normandy invasion in 1944 before he arrived with the USS Sanborn. He was tasked with helping to transport troops, but he spent a lot of his time running into the open battlefield to grab lost and available medical supplies that had been left on the beach. During one such run, he was shot and killed by the Japanese army. Sergeant Bill Genaust joined the U.S. Marine Corps at age 34 in 1943, answering a call to be a combat photographer. By February 1945, he was on one of the ships that brought the first waves of Marines to Iwo Jima. After many days of capturing images and film of bloody combat for posterity, Genaust was present when the photograph of American soldiers raising the U.S. flag on Mount Suribachi was taken, capturing the moment on 16mm film. Genaust didn't just document the war effort, he participated in it too. He offered to investigate one of the many hidden caves on the island that Japanese soldiers used for cover, hiding, and staging attacks. While checking to see if the area was occupied, possibly with a flashlight, he was shot and killed by the Japanese. That part of the cave system was so impenetrable with troops and firepower that the Americans retreated and exploded the cave. As of 2025, Genaust's remains have never been recovered.